Hello, I'm Dennis Pravinsky, and welcome to Grandpa Dennis's Woodturning Studio. Today I have a 3.5-inch thick burl. I'm going to try and turn this thin burl into an almost 8-inch thick bowl. How am I going to do that? Well, stay tuned and let's see how that works. The first task is to get rid of all this loose bark. I'm going to have trouble getting rid of the bark in between here, but we'll see what the wire wheel can do. I picked up this burl April 2004. So, it's been drying in my shed for 20 years. Well, 21 years. I think it's dry. The tip I showed a few videos ago. I want to take off my vacuum chuck. So I lock my spindle. I unlock the vacuum chuck. There, and that's off. What if this was 20 pounds? That would be quite awkward to take off like that. So, I've got an alternative. Okay, here we go. There's my vacuum chuck. I lock my spindle. I unlock that. So now the piece is unlocked from the spindle. I turn my lathe to reverse, turn the speed down, unlock the spindle, hold on to the piece, and Bob's your uncle. I mean, Dennis is your grandpa. Here's another tip for dealing with a wire wheel on a lathe. There are a lot of chucks out there, drill chucks, that have a Morse 2 taper, which is what most lathes have. However, if you put pressure on the wire wheel this way, you have a tendency on loosening up the Morse taper in here, and it starts flopping and maybe spinning off. If you can find a chuck with a Morse 2 taper and a threaded insert here, this is the way to go. That was my second pass on the wire wheel. I don't think I took much of the bark, if any of it, off on the burl sections, but I did clean up all of the dirt, that's for sure. And I got this down a little bit more. I think this is going to work. Now it's time to cut the burl down here, and then I'll take these two halves, flip them on top of each other. Now it's time for the epoxy. I've got all my stuff here, all ready to go. This is designer epoxy from Montreal, Canada. They sell right across North America. designerepoxy.ca. If you're interested in purchasing any of this, put my code Grandpa Dennis at the end of your purchase, and that'll get you a 10% discount. So, I'm going to mix up a bunch here. I started off by putting inside the pail I put a generous amount of mold release. Now I'm going to mix up a bunch of this stuff. How much it is? How much am I going to mix up? Well, a whack of stuff. And a whack is about that much. It's a technical term for wood turners. I might need 2 of these. Now, I'm going to put Caribbean Blue in with Mother Pearl. Well, here's the first pour. This is my pressure pot, which doubles as a vacuum chamber. All I needed was a seal around the top and then an acrylic lid that goes on. There we go. And this is the acrylic lid that's specially made for this pressure pot. Now the bubble's already starting. By releasing the vacuum, it dissipates the bubbles. The bubbles are mainly caused by the mixing process that injects air into the resin. But there's also air inside the burl, and this is drawing that air out as well. Full vacuum for my location is about 28 to 29 inches. This is halfway there, and it's pulling out a lot of bubbles already. This process will take probably 45 minutes to an hour. So it's been almost an hour. There's hardly any bubbles coming out of there. So now it's time to change this over to a pressure pot. Okay, now I want to introduce air into the pressure pot slowly so it doesn't splatter all of the resin. So the vacuum chamber pulled the air out of the burl and out of the resin. The pressure pot is forcing the resin to condense as much as it can. Any leftover bubbles get pressed in so far they're microscopic, and it also pushes the resin into any nooks and crannies and any of the grain that's really soft in the wood. So the combination of the two I find to be very productive and efficient and effective. So the pressure in the pot is at just over 60 psi, and it's going to stay there for 3 days. That's the length of time it takes for the resin to cure and get solid. Okay, let's get it to the lathe. I'm truing up the bottom to create a tenon for my chuck to hold the piece. This is the one-way stronghold chuck. I've got the profile jaws on here. Now that is flat. This is relatively heavy, so I did bring the tailstock up for added support. I'll be taking that away once I start doing some hollowing, but I usually keep it in there until I finish sculpting the outside. Resin is extremely hard. It's difficult to keep the sharpness on ordinary high-speed steel tools. So the best way to deal with turning resin is using carbide tip tools. My go-to tools for this procedure come from huntertools.com. Now, my plan for this, originally I thought I'd make a bowl, but that's too deep for a bowl of this diameter. So, my thinking now is to cut this down significantly, make a foot in there, maybe about that size, and bring it up like a goblet, and then have this rounded over and hollow out the bowl here. So this becomes rather large goblet/bowl. Now it's time to come up with conclusions on the final design in here. I've got this hollowed out completely, and the shape in here and inside is what I want. I'm not altogether sure how this should be in here. So when I'm looking at that, I'm imagining it sitting upright. Sometimes it's much better to take this off and look at it in its natural configuration. Most chalices have a bulge in here. That's why when you grab hold of the chalice by the stem, your fingers then go up over that bulge that's in there. On a wine glass, it's not there. When you hold the stem, your hand comes up to the bottom of the bowl part. I'm not sure I like this. So, this is not helping me make a decision. So plan A was to look at the piece while it's on the lathe, and I was a little bit ambivalent about that. Plan B was to put it onto a table and look at it when it's standing in its vertical position. Now, that's not helping me a great deal, so I'm going to plan C. Now, this is plan C. I've taken a piece of paper and drawn to the actual size the piece. So that's what I have right now on this. I found that it's almost impossible to start the drawing here, do that shape, and then do the corresponding shape exactly the same. So what I always do is draw a line down the middle, draw this shape out as best I can, or what I'd like, then fold the paper along the middle, take it to a window and trace that part as I'm looking through this and seeing this piece underneath. That gives me a more accurate picture. So that's what it looks like, and I'm saying I don't like that. I think it's too busy in this area. So I redrew it and did this. I took away that bulge and did that. I think this is what I'm going to go for. Before I get started, I just wanted to show you the results of the turning in terms of the mess in the shop. Those ribbons of epoxy just fly all over the place. They also seem to be statically charged, and they do stick to things. So, one of the issues I have found is right in here. Sometimes you'll get the dust from the sanding of the epoxy, and it coats itself on the different parts of the lathe, and this starts sticking. And I couldn't figure out why it's not moving smoothly. And the answer is some of that dust clogs up things and causes it to stick. Now it's time to take off the chuck and to clean up the bottom. That's an adapter from oneway.ca. They're around the $50 mark. These threads, when you order this, these threads are to match your lathe. So whatever your lathe is, they'll do the threads for that. That screws into your faceplate or your chuck. Doesn't have to be super tight. That screws onto your live center. Now, this piece is completely centered and balanced. I've mounted a vacuum chuck. Again, this is a particular one, comes from oneway.ca. Turn on my vacuum and push the bowl against the vacuum chuck, and the vacuum starts coming in. I'm at 25 inches right now. 28 is the max I've ever got out of my system. And that's at 26. And for my purposes, it's enough. So now the piece is held on by the vacuum and by the force from the tailstock. I loosen up my chuck. And pull the tailstock away. Now I bring up my tailstock again so that I'll give some added support as I'm turning the bottom. So the question is, why do I need my tailstock if I've got a vacuum chuck holding the piece? Well, here's the trick. If I get a slight catch in here, there's a risk of breaking the seal in there. I don't need complete access to the bottom at this time. All I'm doing is truing this up and getting rid of the tenon. That'll leave a very small nub at the end, which I'll saw off and then hand sand. At the end of the process, I might pull this away, have the vacuum hold it on, and do sanding of the bottom. Not a lot of pressure on the sanding. Reverse the bowl on the lathe in preparation for the finishing process. I use denatured alcohol to get rid of the dust prior to putting on the first coat of finish. I'll let that soak into the burl for 5 minutes or so, and then try and coat it again, any of the dry spots. Once I've got it saturated as much as I can, then I'll wipe it all off. This turned out much better than I thought it was going to. I really do like the shape. The color is unbelievable. That blue with the white swirls is really something. And the grain on the burl is really spectacular. So is this a goblet or is it a bowl? It's a goblet bowl. That's what it is. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video and all the tips in it. Subscribe to my channel if you did. Most importantly, hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. And give me a comment. What do you think? Do you think these were the right decisions on this? When we started this video, I said I'd take a 3.5-inch burl and turn it into a 7-inch bowl. Well, this ended up being about 6.5 inches. Now when I pared off the bottom, it's about 6 inches in height. Didn't quite make the 7 inches, but it certainly made good use out of a small little burl. Stay tuned for a close-up on this at the end of the video. And until then, keep on turning.
Grandpa Dennis is turning.
I'm alright, 'cause I'm okay. Doesn't matter if my beard is gray. Just listen, I have something to say.
Grandpa Dennis is turning.
I'm alright, 'cause I'm okay. And this old goat has something to say. So just keep learning from Grandpa Dennis's turning.